Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to my capstone presentation. I'm Jacqueline Mendenhall. I started the MSc or the program last January, and I really can't believe that it's already over, but I've had a great time. And I want to talk about my capstone project, which was focused on how heat islands intersect with vulnerable demographics in Spokane, Washington. Some quick background, urban areas, the urban heat island effect is caused by urban areas absorbing and storing more heat from solar radiation than from their rural counterparts. This illustration is great for showing how more natural areas dissipate heat through natural processes, while urban materials store that heat. And on average, urban areas experience 1 to 7 degrees hotter temperatures than their rural counterparts. A little bit about Spokane. Since records began in 1890, which was 135 years ago, there have been 64 years with a highest temperature that was 100 degrees or hotter. However, 13 of those years have been since the year 2000. So we can see that there is an increasing trend in hotter days in the area. Also, in 2021, the West Coast of North America was affected by an extreme heat event called a heat dome. This event, all from BC or from British Columbia to Oregon and Washington, Idaho, California, it killed at least 900 people, possibly more than 1,000. And 157 of those deaths were in Washington state, with 19 of them being in Spokane County. One option for adapting to extreme heat events is cool building materials. There is cool roofing material, cool siding material, and even cool pavements that can be used in parking lots or on rough streets. And within this study, I wanted to run a model of how a cool roof program could benefit Spokane. Cool materials are a more passive way of adapting to extreme heat events. They reflect more solar radiation rather than absorbing it, which is what these diagrams are illustrating. And studies have shown that cool roofs can reduce the interior temperature of buildings by 2 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit, which in turn would reduce the energy needed to cool the buildings and would reduce the load on the power grid for the community as a whole. And cool roofs also have a kind of a cool side effect, as they call it the neighborhood cooling effect. So even if you don't have a cool roof, but your neighbor does, like the air temperature around your neighbor's house would be cooler on average, so that would benefit you as well. A quick overview of my methods. I used Google Earth Engine to create averaged images of land temperatures for June to August of 2020 and 2024. I gathered my demographic data from the 2020 census, and I used building footprints from the city to model my cool roof program. The demographics that I chose to focus on are folks who are age 65 or older. 13 out of 19 of the fatalities in that 2021 heat dome event were older folks, and they are just a bit of a more vulnerable population in general. Folks who walk or ride the bus to work, they have greater exposure to the elements simply because they have to spend more time outside to get to where they're going. And finally, folks who live at or below the poverty line, because even if they do have access to an air conditioner or can buy more fans or cooling options, The extra cost of like running those fans, the extra cost of electricity could be too much of a burden, so it might not be accessible to them. Finally, to model my Cool Roof program, I ran scenarios with 10, 25, and 50% participation and ultimately created maps that show the average change in temperature for each census tract. This is an example of essentially a raw LST image from Google Earth Engine. In this 2020 image, we can see that the area south of I-90, known as the South Hill, is the coolest in the area, and that there are several hotspots north of I-90. With that, I did want to point out that the large hotspot to the far east of the city is like a smaller airport, and you can kind of see the runway pattern in the heat or the hotspot. So I thought that was pretty neat. I used that image to create what is essentially a hotspot map that displays the average summer temperatures for each census tract in the city. The hottest temperatures occur in the easternmost tract where that airport is, but there is a trend where the tracts east of Highway 2 and north of I-90 experience hotter temperatures on average. We can see that on average, those bright red tracks experience between 101 to 105 degrees Fahrenheit for the months of June to August. And um, I created similar maps to the hotspot map for each of my chosen demographics by calculating the percentage of the population of each census tract that identifies with that demographic. And I combined that with my hotspot map to find areas that are most at risk with these bivariate maps. This is my bivariate map for folks age 65 or older. The blue area represents the highest concentration of folks age 65 or older. And we can see that they are primarily congregated south of I-90 on the South Hill. But there are three dark purpley red tracks in the north of I-90 that have a high percentage of elderly folks who would also be at risk of experiencing those hotter temperatures. In this map, the bright green areas are the intersection between people who walk to work and who would also be exposed to high temperatures. And we can see that they are more concentrated to the northeastern part of the city. Similarly to the last map, the bright purple areas represent folks who primarily use buses as transportation and who would also be exposed to high temperatures. And that trend continues where they are more concentrated to the northeastern part of the city. Finally, this map is folks who live at or below the poverty line. And again, we can see that there is a higher concentration of those dark red brown tracks to the northeast, indicating that there is a higher percentage of impoverished people who live in that area and who would also be exposed to those hotter summer temperatures. For my cool roof model, I reduced the study area to the northeastern part of the city, which, as we saw, has the most at-risk populations. I converted my building footprints into point data because I was losing a lot of data while trying to work with the polygons. And buildings were randomly chosen to participate in the 10, 25, and 50% participation scenarios. Participating buildings were given a cool roof temperature by using this equation where delta A represents the change in albedo for the cool roof. And the best way that I can describe what albedo is like if you wear a black shirt outside on a hot day, it's going to feel a lot hotter than if you wear a white shirt, and that translates into roofing material as well. So Albedo factor was zero point 0.5, so that's a zero point 0.5, essentially a zero point 0.5 increase in solar reflectance. The solar factor S of 1 accounts for Spokane sunny weather, and the efficiency factor of or F, I used zero point 0.7 to attempt to model the human element in owning a cool roof. If your cool roof or if your roof is dusty or covered in leaves or something like that, it loses reflectance. So the efficiency factor takes into account just suboptimal um, performance, essentially. Each scenario was interpolated to create what is essentially a new LST image, similar to what Google Earth Engine created. And those temperatures were averaged across census tracts again. The temperatures were subtracted from the 2024 actual temperatures to show how the average temperatures would change. So this is my map for the 10% participation scenario. We can see that most of this part of the city is experiencing zero point 0.3 degrees Celsius cooler temperatures on average, with the far east tract experiencing 1.5 degrees cooler temperatures on average. There is that bright red tract in the middle that is experiencing hotter temperatures on average, but I'll touch on that in a bit. With the 25% participation, there are a few more tracks that have moved into that zero point 0.3 degree cooler temperature zone. And there is one more tract, the very northern tract, that has moved into the zero point 0.5 degree cooler temperature zone. And finally, with the 50% participation scenario, we have two tracks that are experiencing 1.5 degrees cooler temperatures on average. And the tract below the most northern tract is now experiencing zero point 0.5 degrees cooler temperatures on average. But the majority of the city is experiencing zero point 0.3 degrees cooler temperatures on average. And just to touch on that bright red tract for a second, um, which has been modeled to gain a degree of temperature on average. This tract is home to the Gonzaga campus. And if we look at the zoomed in satellite image, we can see that a lot of their large buildings already have white roofs, which is a type of cool roof. White reflects more solar radiation than black does. Um, and just by kind of the nature, they have all of their sports fields in this area as well. So there just is less of a percentage of buildings that are participating. But also, if a non-participating building has a white roof already, then we're losing that cooling factor that is in reality currently. So if I got to improve this project, I would definitely try to account for existing roof types. And I would also work on the model to work with polygons rather than point data so that uh, surface area could also be a variable for how the neighborhood cooling effect um, is is present in reality. And just to wrap up, as we've seen through this model, even a lower participation in a cool roof program would offer some protection to those at risk. There has been studies done that show that a targeted cool roof program has more benefits than just kind of a shot in the dark program. So focusing efforts on this area that is more at risk would have more benefits. There are also several community programs in Spokane currently who have been working to bring awareness and preparedness to how the area is changing and how the community can adapt to those changes. So this is not something that is on people's radar already. Precedent has also been set with several states, cities, and counties already establishing cool roof programs. And these range from rebates for installation, loan assistance for installation and maintenance, or even building ordinance for new construction. So it would be feasible to imagine that Spokane could implement something like this. And finally, just as much as we've been told that like we as individuals should do our part to adapt for climate change or reduce our effect on climate change, having our infrastructure also adapt to protect us while we do those take those steps is also important. Cool building materials really seem like a great option because they don't only benefit those inside the buildings, but they would also benefit our outside neighbors and our community as a whole. Thank you.